Show starts in 1 minute. Good evening, folks, and a hearty welcome to our drive-in theater. We have a wonderful evening's entertainment lined up for you, one that will provide several hours of pleasurable relaxation and diversion for you and your family.
Like 9 out of 10 film stars, Raquel Welch uses Lux Beauty Soap.
Well, no, I like to be a woman and a man to be a man, you know.
We hope you'll make this a weekly visit. You love the tasty array of snacks we have to offer. Bring your friends. There are always wonderful new pictures to see. We hope you have a wonderful time.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Longhouse, the NPR for the sensible centrist. Welcome back, Luddic Path.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be back as usual. So,
Yes.
I mean, for this episode, we named it Petrodollar for Dummies, and to put a little bit of context into this, I mean, I've mentioned it previously that I've started to collaborate with the praxarchy.com, and through my journeys, I meet a lot of talented people. So I've brought one of the, in my view, one of the rock star writers for Praxarchy on the show today. So we could introduce Dissident Nomad. How are you doing?
Hi guys, hi everyone. Yeah, hi to everyone in the chat, and yeah, it's great to be here today. Thanks, Luddic. Rockstar writers, I never heard that one before. I'm definitely going to have to bookmark that for later. But
You can put it on your resume.
Yeah, my dissident stroke centrist resume for sure. Yeah, that's
Exactly. Yeah.
It's all about PR and marketing. So.
So it was, as Luddic said, it was through his work on Praxarchy that I got into touch with a couple of articles you wrote for Praxarchy and also on your Substack, and they sort of they seem to fall into a larger write-up that you're doing about sort of the makeup of the American empire, as we call it. But these 3 articles are called the Petrodollar. And for people listening in the future, I'm probably going to leave a link in the description to the articles themselves if you would like to read them. But they deal with a lot of financial stuff. And for someone like me who have a bit of economics from interests in university, etc., the world of finance and the world of economics is very different.
Sure.
And there's so when I called this the Petrodollar for Dummies, I am one of the dummies that needed to do a lot of Googling on the side when I was reading this, especially part 1.
Yeah.
But that's not your fault. It seems Luddic said this before the stream, that it's almost like deliberate to obfuscate the fact that nothing is real and it's all fake money being passed around.
Yeah, that's one of the underlining themes. I mean, yeah, don't worry. I mean, when 2 years ago, I really, what I knew about economics and finance and the monetary system, I kid you not, could probably fit on the back of a postage stamp and still have enough room for the Queen's head, as they say. But yeah, that's right. So, I mean, my main area of focus, as you said, is kind of the broader sort of US empire and the global American empire. And basically, I sort of advanced the idea that the American empire and American strength is basically predicated on the US dollar, and in particular, the dollar's status as the world reserve currency, which it was granted at Bretton Woods. And, overall, America's military economic, political, cultural dominance is all predicated on the strength of the US dollar. Now, some of the various sort of economic inputs, some of it gets quite nuanced, quite complex. I mean, I tried in my writing, I sort of tried to break it down really to the essential bits. But you know, the more you read, the more you study and learn, you can kind of get over those hurdles. I mean, I was a complete novice.
Yes.
2 years ago, I had I think I had the Austrian school introduction to economics. It's about 60 pages. What is inflation? What is interest rates? But that's all, that's neither here nor there. But I sort of focus on history, on, political economy, US foreign policy, geopolitics, all those areas. They kind of all come together in my work. And that's sort of.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that I can see, especially in this article series. In part one, you spend a lot of time talking about sort of the nitty-gritty of how this, you called it the petrodollar, but you seem to, when we talked and later on, you seem to stress that it's sort of more the unified dollar system of the United States, and how this how these systems are set up to sort of basically generate infinite money in a sense for
Absolutely.
the US to be able to have the show of military strength necessary to keep these systems running. It's kind of a perpetual motion machine in that sense, where the US seem to sort of pigeonhole themselves into a situation where, and that's something you really get into in the later parts, where not protecting the operation of these systems becomes more important than actually following international law.
Absolutely.
and other rules.
I mean, I call it, I've come to term it, the dollar system. That's the overarching sort of umbrella term I use. Now, within the dollar system, there are, as you said, Walrus, there's various mechanisms there. There's the petrodollar, there's the treasury and bond market. There is the concept of world reserve currency as well. There's all kinds of inputs that go into sort of building the dollar system. So I mean, as I say, the American empire is intimately tied to the dollar's position as the global reserve currency, which basically allows the United States to assemble, this formidable military apparatus to pursue its geopolitical goals, but also for America, for the United States to continue its current levels of particularly spending and consumption, debt, spending and consumption. So so let's break this down a little bit. So
I'm just thinking before we get into some of the more technical breakdowns, I think the audience might be curious how you ended up in these spaces. If you could maybe spend maybe five minutes on on that.
Yeah, that's great. That's always a lot of fun when I click on a stream. That's always quite enjoyable to see how people came here. I mean, I've sort of been in these, if you like, these broader dissident right circles for really since about 2016 as a Brit. Obviously I campaigned hard for Brexit, but at the same time there was Trump in America, and a lot of us were like doing both of them at the same time. And I sort of got drawn into sort of the old, if it's okay to say, the alt-right, and then into like the Sargon sphere, and a bit cringe, but like
you're the one when they talk about the alt-right to Sargon pipeline. That's you.
Right. It's normally the libertarian to alt-right pipeline, but I've dabbled in every type of right of center movement, whether it's the paleocons, libertarians. I think you take a bit from all of them, and you sort of end up somewhere on the right wing on spectrum, so to speak. But it was really funny because 2016 happened. I was like, right, we get Trump in, we get Brexit, all the problems are going to be solved. That's it. I'm done with politics. And boy, was I ever wrong. And
we're going to go back to Fresh Prince, as it were, and we
back to the via Donald Trump and Brexit, but that Brexit, of course did not happen. And you start asking yourselves, we start asking ourselves some of the more pressing fundamental questions to do with liberalism, to do with so-called free markets, and a lot of these tropes, and a lot of them, let's be honest, a lot of them are right-wing conservative things, that we've invested our faith and commitment in. And you sort of dig a bit deeper, and you suddenly start to realize that the mainstream media, those so-called conservative, in inverted commas, outlets, they're not really giving us a full picture here. And you go from Sargon, you get to someone like, I don't know, like AA or something, and you start breaking down those barriers. And personally, I started doing a bit of writing. I didn't have a lot of experience, and I kept seeing the same things, the same protagonists, crop up, and a lot of it was to do with the current global hegemonic power, and that was the United States, and the monetary system, the dollar, the Federal Reserve, the central banking complex. That kind of comes from the libertarians, and you sort of piece this together, and you're like, well, it's actually a lot different from what the mainstream narrative. And
yes,
that's sort of how I now I'm a full-time dissident without actually ever consciously choosing to be one. That's kind of how I feel.
Well, there's a message from me to Luddick from earlier in this week when I started reading the articles, and it says something along the lines of reading these articles on the petrodollar makes me ashamed of ever having been a libertarian, because I find it's a very useful lens of that too. As you also write, it's a very multifaceted system and set of issues, and there's not necessarily one right way of looking at it, but it's a very useful tool, at least where now, after having read it, it's a very useful tool to have in my toolbox to understand, okay, well, what really happened after 9/11, what really happened in Libya, and how do I look out for it in the future? Now I know where to look, right? And how to think about it.
So one thing you mentioned is that the idea that you were listening to these kind of standard conservative outlets, and they were giving you kind of part of the truth, but not the whole truth in a sense. And this is something that I think AA has brought up previously as well, where it really seems like just on a gut level, people like us would agree with the conservatives, but when it comes to their presentation and their version of reality and how they process the world from a technical level, they are just wrong about everything. They're just wrong about absolutely everything. And it's painful to admit, but a lot of these kind of shit libs have been correct. That's been one of the more painful points for me.
I totally agree. Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. I mean, AA says, he has this line, small parts of the left, the shit lib narrative are correct, but almost the entirety of that, the boomercon kind of narrative is I mean, it's not correct, it's just outright lies. Now I guess we're not going to go too much into like boomer truth narrative, but no, I totally agree with you. I mean, like one thing that did, I mean, I also, my literary background as well, like I read several books which completely sort of decimated the mainstream view of the system, and how power works, how the economy works, boomer truth, and so on and so forth. I mentioned these on my stream with Bradlib last week, but certainly like John Perkins' Confessions of an Economic Hitman, that's a very good one for breaking down how the American empire works. And surprise, surprise, it's not all about freedom and liberal democracy, it's actually you know, a lot more sort of insidious and you know, I would actually say brutal than that. You know, when you factor in the US military, the banking system, how multilateral organizations come together. So that was very good. But also from that left of center thing, like, yeah, some of these might be a bit contentious names, but like Naomi Klein, Noam Chomsky, you know, looking at the CIA, their covert operations in Latin America, the Southern Cone and things like that, how they've destabilized all these countries for their own gain, you know, for their own prosperity. So all of that sort of resonated with me. Patrick J. Buchanan's Churchill, Hitler, The Unnecessary War. I'm kind of going off in a tangent here, but in terms of like the, you know, well, we're on YouTube, but, you know, certain aspects of the Second World War do not really conform to how, you know, Hollywood and the liberal narrative, how they present. And, you know, you put this all into a blender and you press the on button and you're suddenly like, well, where am I now? And then, you know, you sort of, you know, you go, you sort of dig deeper to AA and Morgoth and, you know, other people, Frody, Midyard and people like that. And, you know, they're knocking on the right doors. And they, well, I'll say this much, they provide a lot more answers than Fox News or anyone in the UK does. I'm almost embarrassed to mention.
Exactly.
They will
like
never question the fundamentals. It doesn't matter how many Ben Shapiro, Joe Rogan, and even Nigel Farage, and videos, or even Donald Trump videos, clips you watch, they will never question the fundamental foundations of the system. And you know, coming back to my work, I just find that a lot of things make sense when you look at them through the lens of political economy and you know, the monetary system, the dollar, the central banking complex, and how that inflects US foreign policy. And you know, I just feel, for me, it's sort of like a paradigm shifter, really. You know, it's not identity politics, it's not, you know, sort of things you get that come up on Twitter, or, you know, somebody looks funny at someone in McDonald's in Ohio or some part of America. You know, these are the subjects and the topics that matter, and that have a controlling influence on world affairs, on all our lives. And yeah, they need a bit more exposure in our sphere generally, really. So
yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, it is really big boy stuff, right? You're talking about economics and geopolitics. It's a topic where you need to have a realistic mind, and you need to have a mind to understand numbers, and you also need to see larger systems that are bigger than just individuals interacting on the basis of emotion. I mean, being a millennial, I remember back to like the era of George Bush Jr. being the president of the United States, and how it was sort of funny for like the cooler kind of center-left crowd to always mock George Bush and to make fun of him and so on. But and like during the Iraq War, you know, the slogan was basically, you know, they're going to war for oil, right? That's what I kept hearing. Of course, the like the BoomerCon side is like, okay, they hate us for our freedom. That's like the purely ideological view. It's just not true on any level. But like the shitlib left, who's kind of correct, are saying that, you know, they're going over there, they're dying for oil, right? Yeah. And what I thought as a teenager was basically, okay, the United States is going over there to sort of secure like oil reserves. They're going to pump the oil out of the ground and take it back to the United States because it's cheaper over there, and that's what they're doing it for. And I think that you know, a lot of the shitlibs believe that as well. And saying that, you know, they're going and doing it for oil, it's partially correct, but it's not 100% correct, because they're going there really not to take the oil, but really to protect the relationship then between the dollar and the oil. Maybe you could.
But I think maybe we should start by getting down some definitions and looking at how the system works. Before we look into why the US would be interested in protecting this. So if I can I have a small list of things that I think the people watching would be interested in understanding if we're gonna like unwrap this, because this is really one of those topics that for every piece of information you get, you have like an oh no moment when you realize what this means. But first of all, you already mentioned the world reserve currency
status. Yeah, that's a very
yeah.
good place to start, Walrus. Yeah, that's the logical starting point. So yeah, reserve currency status. Okay, I might just drag it back a bit. Now, one thing a lot of viewers will often hear, and to be fair, you kind of almost will hear this in the mainstream media as well, is there's a lot of structural imbalances with the US economy. In fact, with most industrialized economies, it's $31 trillion in debt. It has a trade deficit of $850 billion. So they've got $850 billion more leaving the country than coming in. The debt to GDP ratio of the US is 124%. Well, like how does this work? How does all of this continue? And how is it that the United States is the global hegemonic power in spite of these, kind of crazy numbers? And
it's funny, Ludwig mentioned sort of being a teenager and watching, the US fight for oil, and even 10 years ago, the US debt would have been something that I can remember thinking to myself, how can they keep doing this? And of course, I haven't, unfortunately, taken the time to understand how until now. But that's also why I think your work is very important.
Yeah. So yeah, it all comes back down to, that's probably the most important concept, the world reserve currency status of the dollar. So what exactly is that? Well, I'll try and illustrate as best I can. So every day, $6.6 trillion are traded on the foreign exchange markets. That's trillion with a T. That is a huge amount. I mean, annually, 85% of all foreign exchange transactions worldwide have the US dollar as one half of the transaction, as half the transaction, as well as the fact that I think 59% of central bank reserves are US dollars or US dollar denominated assets. So that basically is, to be honest, in layman terms, that's all the money that a sovereign country has, their central, what they hold in their central banks. And, worldwide, 59% of that is dollars. So as well as the
very basically, then, would it be correct to say that sort of the status as a world reserve currency just means that this is the currency that most other countries other than the US are holding?
Yes, absolutely. But the thing is, that's absolutely true. But that's only one piece of it, because when countries go to trade, many commodities such as oil, as we'll get onto, coffee, and ironically gold are only traded for in dollars. The US dollar is the reserve currency for goods, services, assets, trade, travel.
And just to be clear, these are often either soft or quite hard agreements and rules that the US has imposed, that these goods, services, oil, etc., have to be traded for or in dollars, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the thing is, the US has leverage at every end of the system, both, monetarily with trade and finance, but also with its geopolitical interests. And these all kind of feed off of each other. It's a self-reinforcing cycle of power, domination, and strength. Now, obviously, there are a few caveats to that. I mean, this isn't World War II, the end of World War II. We're at the Bretton Woods Conference, or the Marshall Plan is beginning. The world has changed. Everybody knows that. There's China, there's Russia, there's many other geopolitical actors who have ambitions of their own, which don't necessarily involve the US dollar or reinforcing American power and American strength. So, yeah, I mean, some of those issues we'll get onto a bit later. But yeah, basically, I would say in summary, for the world reserve currency, the global economic system runs on dollars. It just, to all intents and purposes, it basically does. I mean, demand for the dollar is built in to the global economic system at every level. And so this is maybe our first thing that I would say is a bit technical. What that does, Ludwig Walrus, is this keeps interest rates low, because basically countries need dollars. They need it for commodities, for oil. Yep. They need it for their reserves. So the interest rate that the US pays on its debts is very low. It's actually been declining since a period called the end of the Great Inflation, which was in the United States from 1965.
Well, I think it's important here just to paint the whole picture, that we take a moment to talk about what a bond or a security is. Because this is the whole OPEC dollar recycling thing. It relies on that.
I think I would just like to add quickly, I mean, in terms of the interest rate, I mean, the reason that the interest rates are low is really because there has to be so many dollars, right? Because the interest rate is always going to be proportional to the amount of that, the currency that's being lent out. So if there's like very little, if there's a scarce supply of a certain currency, if it's like the euro or something, then the interest rates will be higher.
Yes.
And if there's a large amount of it, the interest rate will be lower. And because of the frequent money printing in the United States, the interest rates are always low.
Yeah, basically. I mean, the debt securities market, the market for US bonds and treasuries, is very important because this is just another extension of the dollar system. And, put simply, I mean, US dollar denominated government issued treasuries of bonds are safe and reliable investments. And the market,
I mean, when you buy a bond, if we're going finance 101 here for a moment, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when you buy a bond from a government, you're basically buying an IOU slip.
Yes, that's
that
right.
says that within the year or something, I think the timing can vary, but within a certain amount of time, we are going to pay this debt with a predefined interest. So you're buying that debt off of someone else, who usually is the government. And then you're basically investing in the government, saying that I believe that within a year, the government will be true to their word and pay me $100 plus 5% interest, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So what a bond or treasury is basically a note. It's normally like a squarish piece of paper from the government to the debt buying country. Normally it could be a bank, and the creditor gets the bond, and in return the US government gets the amount issued on the bond, say $100, but there will be a gratuity, small amount of interest attached to that. Now the bondholder can do one of two things. They can hold on to the bond and keep on accruing a small amount of interest, or of course they can cash it for the requisite amount of US dollars, and so that's how the market.
But where it gets a bit tricky is in the understanding that a bond from a government is basically a piece of its debt. Like when we understand when we say that the US is X amount of $1 trillion in debt, and you buy a bond from the US government, you're buying a piece of that debt. And saying
absolutely.
that, I expect the government to pay me that piece within a certain time frame. And that's very important to remember once we get into how they're actually, because this is the mechanism that sort of allows them to infinitely spend and print money.
Yeah, absolutely. So in return, the US gets that $100, $200 in cash, and then they go off and do whatever they want with it: commodities, build another airbase, military installation,
so just
defense subsidies, and
quickly, I think like the most like super normie way to explain it, like without having this security in the middle, it's really actually other countries that are borrowing the United States government's money on interest, and that is sort of represented as a type of financial product, right?
Yes.
And usually this is not considered, like I think that's the hard part to understand is the idea of buying debt, right? But you have to think about this as basically you're borrowing money to somebody with an interest as a form of investment. Because to most people, they're just going to think about a stock, right? They want to buy a part of a company that may be paying dividends and so on, and that's easy to understand. I think it's hard for people to understand, the debt buying because of the low interest rate, right? Because let's say if the interest rate is low,
Sure.
why would you want to borrow money to somebody if you can only get 2 or 3%?
Well, I mean, the idea is that you're saying that I think that the U.S. government is going to be good to their word, and in a year's time, they're going to pay me $105.
Exactly.
Right?
And the thing is,
because it's the government, that's a pretty safe bet.
Yeah. And the
In the
dollar
modern economy.
is the most stable, secure, liquid currency in circulation. By liquid, that means the ease, the speed, the accessibility of transferring the asset or even the currency into into money, into another currency. And the market for US debt instruments is by all recognition, the safest, most reliable financial market, arguably ever, to be honest with you. I mean, the market for euro denominated debt securities is also fairly extensive, but it's nothing compared to the dollar. But again, you get back to the point, is it's a self-reinforcing cycle, because on the strength of the US economy and US exports, and that's what makes the dollar and dollar denominated treasuries and bonds so stable. So people reinvest in them. I mean, you're probably not going to do it with a developing country, Brazil, I don't know, India or something like that, or one of these countries, Thailand, because, to be honest, some of those countries have achieved fairly good growth numbers and have fairly competitive industries, but they don't have anywhere near the strength, the security, the stability of either the Eurozone and definitely not the dollar. Do you know what I mean? So it's that's
I have
really...
an example here which I wrote down, and again, feel free to call me out on anything that's off here, but just for us to go through this whole recycling process, let's imagine for a moment that I am the country of Japan. And I would like to buy some oil. Now, due to various reasons, which you go into quite detail about in your articles, but I'm just going to smooth over it now. Due to various reasons, you need dollars if you want to buy oil. That's the rules. So first you need to get dollars. Well, how do you get dollars? You have to buy things from the US. You have to buy commodities that the US produce. So that might be American cars, for example. And when you do that, I mean, the United States has economic profit from those purchases, and you get dollar.
Are you sure?
Oh shit!
No, I think you have to sell.
It's the other way around. Sorry. Yeah,
you sell.
We have to sell.
US
you have to sell cars, Japanese cars, to the US. Yeah, sorry. And get dollars in return.
That's right.
I had it the other way around.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So the petrodollar agreement was kind of ratified in the early to mid 70s, and it's highly significant because it meant that from its inception, basically, artificial demand for the dollar was basically built into the global economy. If you need oil, if you want oil, you first need dollars to purchase oil. You need oil to power.
So you have to transport goods basically to the US to get dollars.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Then, when you then use those dollars to buy oil, you buy that usually through like OPEC or something, like an OPEC country. And the agreement then is that part of the profits that OPEC then gets from you buying oil in dollars is then used to purchase government bonds from the US. Because it's used to purchase debt from the US.
Yes.
And that's the key thing that allows the interest rate to stay low, because the US, yes, the debt is huge, but it's continuously always paid off.
Yeah.
like they're always paying off sort of the top of it, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then borrowing more and then paying off again off the top of that. As long as interest rates are low, the US can basically keep on borrowing,
and they get to double dip basically on all portions here of the trade, because they're the ones, who's minting the dollar.
Yeah, absolutely. Because all this trade in US dollars, whether it's purchasing the oil or, like you say, the OPEC countries who purchase US debt instruments, treasuries and bonds, this all adds to the liquidity of the dollar. It strengthens the dollar, and it keeps interest rates down. It means the US can borrow more, and then the cycle just repeats again, and they take those dollars and they use it for military subsidies, building bases, Nimitz class.
And then they build a base in an OPEC country to make sure that the oil reserves in question are being protected, and this is the part where me being ashamed of ever being libertarian gets in, because saying that, oh man, it would be cool if this wasn't the case. Well, if this wasn't the case, America wouldn't exist. So, if this collapses, America collapses.
Yeah, because the nature of this system means that, the US doesn't have to reduce consumption. It doesn't have to produce more. It doesn't have to run a better balance of payments or have a better trade balance, trade deficit as well, because other countries, they would be forced to act as other countries do, and that is with more restraint and, to reduce consumption, have higher interest rates. But the US basically is absolved of all that responsibility because of the world reserve currency of the dollar, and also because of, like you say, the apparatus that maintains that, the military and so on and so forth. But you sort of reach something kind of deeper, I dare say even existential questions, whereas, well, does the monetary system support the military, or does the military support the monetary system? One is predicated on the other. Do you see what I mean? It's kind of it's sort of,
well, it really hammers home the whole, like, all wars are banker wars, right?
Well, I actually deal with some of those in my most recent article that will be with Luddick hopefully next week, and and then that raises questions about the Federal Reserve, the central banking complex, but also the nature of money and things, because after they call the 20th century the century of war, because effectively after 71, when Nixon removed the gold peg, money before that was backed by gold, but now it's free floating. It's not backed by anything. So the central bank can just print off US bills, US dollars, and they know that the way the system is constructed, it will prevent it from experiencing hyperinflation, and keep interest rates low.
Yes.
Whereas other countries that have to deal with the real inflationary consequences of just printing US dollars. And of course, just to bring this back to the real world and present times, I mean, Putin made a fairly famous speech at the end of last year at Red Square when he annexed some of the territories, and he even referenced this in that really long speech where he hammered at the gay and the West. And
the Empire of Lies speech.
Yeah, the Empire of Lies. Yeah. That's it. Yeah, the Empire of Lies, and that's right. So and the other thing is, when it comes to investing a portion of the profits in US debt, effectively China has the same arrangement with America. America buys copious amounts of consumer goods, and China takes a portion of those profits, buys up debt instruments, and that allows America to keep on running these huge deficits.
So I mean, a point that I wanted to talk about here is really like the idea of like why the United States doesn't have to be careful with their spending or actually deal with inflation, because I mean the inflation is, in a sense, it's spread out all over the entire system, right? They're able to sort of push these kind of inflationary effects on lowering like the values of things to the entire world. It's not isolated to them in particular. And I want to sort of get, because they, of course, they control the printing of the money as well, so they can continue to print the money, making it easier for them to pay back the debts that they have.
Well, not just that, they control. I mean, there's all sorts of things that they can do. Like they have the price controls on oil for a lot of stuff, right? So if a competitor shows up, they can literally tank the price on oil to basically outcompete any newcomer in the market.
Absolutely. Yeah, can I just come in there? I mean, that isn't just true, Walrus. That is exactly what happened in the early to mid 80s. So I've termed this away from the dollar system. I call this the dollar weapon. So, I mean, what you just said is exactly what happened. So basically, during the Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan administrations, the Soviet Union was the single biggest supplier of oil at the time in terms of a single country. So what they did is they scrapped price controls. They did what you just said. They scrapped price controls with OPEC. The price of crude oil plummeted because the market was flooded with excess oil, because they also scrapped production levels as well. They basically removed the glass ceiling on production. The market was swamped with an excess supply of crude oil, and one of the Soviet Union's main revenue streams was basically knocked out. And, that was a very big problem, just as they were going into Afghanistan at the time, and that 10-year-long engagement, the Soviet Union's Vietnam. And that was sort of engineered and orchestrated by the United States. I think it was under the Jimmy Carter administration where they devised it, but it was under Reagan that they implemented it. But this had disastrous effects across the world, because countries like Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, they relied on oil, Venezuela, as their main source of income. And when that tanked, when that capitulated, that caused huge economic problems across the developing world. So the dollar is a weapon. And going back to what Ludwig said about the inflation, yeah, that's obviously quite a complicated topic, but the US obviously deals with inflation. Yes, it does. I mean, it's had some now, but the point is, the privileges that the dollar system and the world reserve currency, so the dollar, means that, and the way that the global economy is all integrated, like, it won't only be the US that has inflation. If it's to do with commodities, goods, services, and or embargoes, Europe will have to deal with it now. That's what we're seeing in real time. Yes, the US has had inflation, but Europe has had it probably even worse, arguably. So these things kind of go in cycles. But when interest rates are low, they tend to borrow and spend a lot. And if you ever actually look at a graph on the yield on a 10-year Treasury certificate, it's just been going down, and it's just one way. It's line go down, so to speak, to coin the meme. That's in a couple of my articles. I think it's in Petrodollar part 2 or part 1. But that's very important. But yeah, that's just how the system works. It's anything but a free market. It's probably the complete opposite, to be honest with you.
Because it's a sort of funny thing that this is making me think about when I'm thinking about all the time I spent trying to follow American politics, and I keep going back to like the boomer conservatives and their kind of completely deluded worldview. But you have these people who talk about, well, we got to run the economy like a household. We can't spend more than we earn. And look at the national debt. It's just going up, and we're in trillions of debts. The debt ceiling keeps going. It's really like, who cares? The rules are completely different for the United States than for the other countries, and
absolutely,
it's like their debts levels. It's like almost like the mileage on a car. It doesn't really matter that much.
But that doesn't matter, because either we can pay it, or the United Empire or the United States Empire collapses, and when it collapses, it doesn't matter. Like it's like either it's kind of like doing weird investments, right? It's like either you get a return or you don't, or if the market collapses, you should have bought ammo. So,
but I mean,
so they're kind of operating on the same scale. Either this works, or we should buy ammo, right?
Well, I mean, but them borrowing, basically, borrowing money, quote unquote, it just means that they're doing good. It means that other countries are willing to, borrow money to them.
That's fair. Yeah.
Because they believe in them, right? And they can print more money to pay them back.
What's weird though is that that predicates a system that basically devalues its own citizens, right? Every sort of working class kind of production industry in the US would have to suffer because of this.
And
yes, that's absolutely right. I mean, there's another side to all this that, if I'm being honest, I haven't really explored fully, but that's that, historically speaking, if you look at all the great empires and I'm reading The Rise and Fall of the Great Empires by Paul Kennedy at the moment. It's a bit of a brick, but one consistent theme is that reserve currency status is almost always a disaster. Without exception, it's a disaster for the native population, to be honest, because they keep having to inflate, and eventually it all comes, crumbling down. I mean, the Romans had the, debasing the coins, and we're effectively doing that now. The modern form of debasing the currency is monetary inflation or quantitative easing, call it what you want. For example, in the case of the United States, the post-COVID stimulus by Biden, I think he, in one fell swoop, he brought in, that was like 20% of all the dollars ever brought into existence, just with that one act, that one policy. So yeah, that's the thing. All the while you're debasing the currency, there's also a lot of related themes, the hollowing out of US industry and most Western industry now, which has gone to the developing world, particularly China and things like that. I mean, that's a big
China, Taiwan, Korea
part of it, but it gets in. It sort of gets quite technical, because then you reach the point where, well, the dollar can't be too strong, because that's going to negatively impact all the trade in dollars. So that's a problem for US people.
But there's also one other thing, and hopefully we have explained the technical stuff here. We've been going for almost 50 minutes, so I think it's time that we discuss some of the consequences of this. So for people following along in the chat and listening to this, I mean, some alarm bells should have started going off about this. And I think that the big thing here is the other side of that thing you mentioned, where you don't want to keep the dollar too high. But you also don't want the dollar to decline too much or too fast, because you get in a weird situation where if the dollar declines in value, then it lessens the dollar holdings around the world, and then you increase the likeliness of foreign nations dumping the dollar, right? And then obviously threatening this entire system and the entire U.S. economy. So suddenly the U.S. has an interest in basically just, at one point, protecting all of these economies, but also hunting or rooting out potential destabilizing factors. Let's put it like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the US has so much invested in the monetary system, and
not just the monetary, the military and the diplomatic side of everything, and it's got its fingers in every cookie jar all over the world.
Exactly. I mean, when this system was designed at the end of World War II, at the Bretton Woods Conference, the United States was the foremost military, economic industrial country on the planet. Mainland America was, of course, untouched by the events of World War II. And, they had complete leverage across the new system to design a system with the dollar as a reserve currency, and the institutions that governed it were all based in Washington, D.C., the World Bank, the IMF. But of course, as time has gone on, the geopolitical climate has changed, it's shifted, and the US is increasingly accounting for less and less of a proportion of world trade. But initially that was fine, Walrus, because a lot of the countries that were growing and developing were under America's gambit, Western Europe, Japan, and so on and so forth. But the thing is, the modern era has seen, the ascension of countries that are not traditionally in America's gambit and that do have some geopolitical influence. China, India to some degree. They are neither dependent on the dollar system, or they would say the US security apparatus, which was always their fallback when European countries, when de Gaulle in France, Adenauer in Germany would question this system. They say, oh well, NATO, the US military, we basically undercut your defense spending and things, but they can't do that with China and Russia and to a large extent, India.
Because they don't have any channels to punish other than, of course, explicit military action, but that's too costly.
Yeah.
But that, I think, it's been 20 years, but it sort of leads us into the Middle East and Iraq. And as I said, it's been 20 years, and I don't think it's a bombshell to say that, it wasn't weapons of mass destructions. Really.
No.
Now, of course, 9/11 probably played a diplomatic or even spiritual role. But it was an attack on, I think you wrote in your article that the targets weren't random. It specifically targeted U.S. intelligence in the form of Pentagon and the U.S. economy or the world economy or the dollar economy in the form of the Twin Towers.
And
so when Luddick then say that, that the old leftist talking point is that the U.S. was in Iraq to do war for oil, it is technically correct, as you said, Luddick. There's a kernel of truth in there, in the sense that they were protecting the oil interests and protecting the dollar value from being basically taken away by Saddam Hussein, who wanted to move more and more towards the euro. Is that correct?
Yes, that's that basically is correct. They are right when they say it's oil, but you're right in your assertion that it's kind of a bit of a semantic play. It is about oil to differing degrees, but that's basically right. What was happening behind the scenes is that 18 months prior to the invasion, Saddam Hussein switched oil transactions from the US dollar to the euro. And that was the first time since the Petrodollar agreement that a sitting OPEC member had sort of made a switch away from the dollar. Now, at the time, Iraq was under all kinds of sanctions from the US as a result of the war in 1991, the Gulf War when they invaded Kuwait. So there's a bit of background there, but basically what
as we discussed, I mean, a minute ago, this is a bit of a snowball that started rolling in terms of the dollar falling out of favor, right? So the US has a very clear interest in stopping this sort of domino effect from happening in the area.
That's that's a very good point. I mean, if we just go back to not to be pedantic, but 1999, that was very important. Suddenly the euro was released. The European countries had got together and they'd had enough of the dollar, and the artificial demand and the monetary inflation, the deficit spending, all the debt financing. So the euro was launched in 1999. There was a lot of pressure being applied on the dollar. There was the Enron scandal. There was the dot-com bubble. There was obviously the introduction of the euro, and then of course there was 9/11. The dollar was kind of sort of in free fall. Really, it was easily the biggest threat to the US dollar since the period of the Great Inflation, and which led to the Volcker shock in the early 80s. So, and round about this time, obviously Saddam makes a switch, and he ends up gaining. Now, this is a very nuanced point. So, before the switch, it was predicted that he would end up losing profits if he switched from dollars to euros. He'd lose profits, but against all economic forecasts and predictions, he actually gained about 17% on the dollar. Now, this is the kind of the very sort of nuanced point, is a lot of people feel that the fall in the dollar was precisely because one of the biggest oil exporting countries had dumped the dollar, adopted the euro, and all that trade that was previously transacted in US dollars was now done in euros. Now, obviously, with the petrodollar agreement, this is a very real and an existential threat to America. If more countries followed Saddam, seeing that he'd gained 17% by dumping the dollar, well, where does that leave us? That we end up going down some very difficult paths for the global American empire, for the US, for Washington, because if other countries start dumping the dollar, then the petrodollar will be no more. And that is a very real threat. As I said in Petrodollar Part 2, an attack on the dollar is an act of war. That might be my single most important sentence if I had to pick one. An attack on the dollar is an act of war, and it won't be tolerated by the United States, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat in the White House. Saddam defied America, he defied Washington, there was all the mirage of weapons of mass destruction, and America went in 2003, and the shock and awe policy, they wrought destruction and devastation on effectively a third world country. Nobody really came to Saddam's aid, and as soon as they got in, they did several things. But the first thing they did was they switched all transactions back to US dollars. They did a whole other bunch of things. They cancelled a bunch of oil infrastructure projects that Iraq had with actually a lot of European countries, Russia, with China, and they just gave them all to US, UK, and Australian contractors, engineering companies. And
strange how that just worked out.
Yeah, absolutely. So rumor has it that
in their favor.
The London Stock Exchange, when they found Saddam, the statue went down, everybody just started cheering, because a lot of elites would have found themselves in a very difficult position.
And that's why in the teaser I had a soundbite from the GAR stream that ran yesterday, where Academic Agents looked at interviews with Tony Blair, and he had a question fielded about his commitment to Iraq and his commitment to work alongside the Americans here, and his sort of gung-ho all-in attitude that pulled Britain into this conflict as well. And I think when you talk about that, the stock exchange cheering when the statue went down, I think that paints a quite a clear picture of why Tony would be interested, or feel like he didn't have a choice, right? Because his country at the time would be just as reliant on the dollar as the US would.
Yeah, I mean, the City of London trades more dollars than it does pounds and
Exactly.
euros combined. It actually, some people say, Investopedia and whatnot say that the City of London trades more dollars than Wall Street. I'm not sure if that's true, but I could imagine so. So I mean, yeah, it's all about the wheels of power, and it's also a little bit about how countries. Well, there weren't many other countries that backed America, but the UK and Australia were two that did, and it's about being surrogates of the US empire and just being pawns under the global American empire. And I mean, I don't know how you two feel about this, but for me, I mean, we need to decouple from America. The sooner, the better for all manner of reasons. I mean, we could be here till
Sure.
next Tuesday if we were to list all of those. But yeah, it's all about it was a big power play by the Americans. It was a on the grand chessboard of Mearsheimer, Kennan, and Brzezinski. Geopolitics, you have to kind of realpolitik, as they say. You have to act in your best interest, and America did. They absolutely did, because again, an attack on the dollar attacks the fundamental foundations of the US empire, and also domestically. So, but I think there was, the Iraq War. I mean, again, it's a very layered, a very complex thing. I don't think that they were expecting, as I said in Petrodollar Part 3, the international response was huge. It was the biggest since the Vietnam War. I mean, the marches, the protests that came out. And I don't think, I just really wonder if, even when you take into account the dollar system and the petrodollar, I don't know
It was
if America
worth the risk. Yeah.
Right, if they could ever have another hot war with boots on the ground. I mean, I just don't. I mean, maybe that's a different subject for a different time. But yeah, so the Iraq War was definitely I call them the petrodollar wars, as I say in my article. Ron Paul, obviously former Libertarian Republican candidate for the presidency, he calls them the forever wars. But yeah. That's it, really. So it's.
I think it's good that you presented that, because I mean, that's certainly one thing that, or Iraq and Libya as well, as you mentioned, if we want to spend 5 minutes on that, is good examples of sort of the consequences of this system. And once you understand that this system is sort of churning in the background, a lot of US foreign policy discussion suddenly makes a lot more sense. You understand why the Republicans are never going to budge on this, because if they do, the economy collapses, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, the Democrats as well. I mean, Hillary and
yes, yeah.
Hillary Clinton was definitely for the Iraq invasion. I'm not
I suppose
sure
the war hawks, or what's called the neocons these days, I'd almost put old Hillary in the same camp.
Yeah, they all like, it was funny when I was researching, one thing. I mean, I'm new to content creation. I've probably only been sort of writing for about actually a bit 6-7 months, and you learn a tremendous amount. But the Libya invasion, even at the time, I was like, wait a second, NATO forces are just going into this country that most people haven't even heard of, that have never done anything to anyone. And I love that clip you had of Christine Amanpour from CNN. She's a real establishment kind of shill, isn't she? I mean, and I actually saw that interview, the full interview with Colonel Gaddafi. But the one that really sort of resonates is Hillary Clinton on I think it's CBS, where she says, we came, we saw, and he died, and then just laughed. And it was literally a click of the finger. And America's done this before. They've done this so many times before. I mean, Bush Senior did this with the Central American country Panama when they went in '89, and in 4 days they just flattened the country, and they took out people. Sorry, I think it's Manuel Noriega. I'm not sure. One of those leaders, and they had no press coverage. Obviously, that was a long time before, but there was a media blackout. Then there was a media blackout over Libya. Okay, there was a little bit of coverage.
It's interesting because having touched on Libya a bit here and there, it seems that Europe had a lot bigger coverage of Libya than the US did. It seems like Libya was not a thing in the US, but I can distinctly remember, Libya being a point of discussion in Europe. But it certainly makes sense that it got blacked out, obviously.
Yeah, I think they must have, again, the elites, the deep state players must have said, look, we're not going to have another fallout like the Iraq war. All the American media companies, I think they're owned by six conglomerate companies. And they probably just said, look, you're going to keep a lid on this. Otherwise, like there's going to be consequences.
There was a lot less, footage of bloody helmets and a lot more look at how weird Gaddafi is.
Yeah, absolutely.
They seem to take that angle.
Yeah, that's what they do. Is the American? I don't talk about the role of the media as much in my articles. I might in the future, but they definitely do have a part to play because they paint all these Middle Eastern leaders as these kind of wacky, sort of unpredictable, kind of crazy Neanderthal kind of people. They did that with Saddam. They do that with the North Korean leaders, anybody that and they do that with Iraq, the Iranian ayatollahs, and
if you've seen the Adam Curtis documentary Hypernormalization, I think he has a part there about Gaddafi. Actually, it seems like the Reagan administration got a lot out of Gaddafi in terms of like the from the wrestling lingo of having him play the heel and then play the face later, basically.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there was with Gaddafi. I mean, there's a lot of stuff, the Lockerbie thing and all kinds of things. But yeah, they had often he would. Well, I think the thing is with Gaddafi, he was always a Pan-African unifier. He believed in African autonomy and independence from the West and the global powers. And you know what? To some degree, I agree. Fair enough. I want autonomy for Europe from from America.
Yeah, I mean Gaddafi is like a very interesting character, and it's a little bit. I'm a little bit torn if he actually was like a very sort of serious guy who really wanted, because before the Pan-African stuff, he was trying to do this Pan-Islamic vision that he had that didn't pan out. But he seemed to have like very grand ambitions about, like you say, African independence and like having their own system and creating new projects and stuff. But I think maybe he was a little bit too ambitious for his own good.
Yeah,
in the end, and he was just sort of played for a fool because Libya, it's not really. He's not really a threat. He's never really been a threat, but it's very easy to sort of play him up as a, in Machiavellian terms, that you pretend that the weak enemy is a lot stronger than they actually are, so you can knock them down.
Yeah, and I remember there was like a whole thing about like him having like all his like royal guards were women.
Yeah.
And like this was played up like because that's an angle because he's an anti-feminist or something, right? Like this is very proto stuff. I mean, Libya, this is like late 2000s, 2011.
Yeah, 2011 when it went in. Yeah, he's an interesting character. So yeah, Libya. So basically, what Gaddafi had planned is he wanted he basically wanted a Pan-African. He wanted a multilateral currency, much like Europe had done a decade earlier with the euro. He wanted the gold dinar to be a unifying African currency, and it would be backed by what is, I mentioned this with Radlib, and he's quite knowledgeable on these things like gold and commodities. Like I think he had 143 tons of gold, which for a country of 7 million people is a lot. As a frame of reference, the Bank of England has about 300 tons, and we're a country of 65 million people. We did have more until...
Yeah, he certainly had the resources to it, and Africa as a continent
as well
probably too has the material and natural resources needed to sort of pull off something like that.
Right. Well, this
as long
is
as they
it.
can find someone who's willing to buy, of course. But I think China and anyone else who isn't the U.S. would have traded with them easily.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I say this in my article. What Africa maybe lacks in, like, GDP per capita and overall development, it more than makes up for in natural resources, raw materials, and what have you. So, and obviously, a lot of the North African countries, they're part of OPEC. Sudan, Angola, I think a couple others are the smaller ones, Equatorial Guinea, Gabon as well. But yeah, and at the time, we're told that there was a lot of support for this project. Nigeria as well, that would be a big one. Sorry, yeah. So there was a lot of support for this project, and Africa would have their own central bank to anchor the new currency, which would be pegged to gold. So it would have an actual solid foundation, unlike fiat currencies. And I think America probably looked at it and said, look, there's just too much of a risk here, because there's no way we can afford another multilateral currency to compete against the US dollar. And of course, the cultural and religious links with the Middle Eastern countries, the OPEC countries. I don't want to go too much into this, but the Berber
No, but it could potentially have been sort of like a backdoor way of achieving what Saddam Hussein
destroying
tried to
OPEC,
do, right?
Yeah, exactly, and having full autonomy, because they consider themselves African. They consider themselves Arabs of some kind. They're sometimes called Berbers, but they culturally they are. They speak Arabic and things. And I think America looked at it and said, "Look, are you kidding me? We've just had the Iraq War. We're still in Afghanistan. We just got to get rid of.
Yeah, we got to nip this in the bud before it becomes a
real
problem.
Well, yeah,
yeah.
And that's what happened. They totally. I don't want to generalize or oversimplify, but Libya is gone for another generation at least. Have totally decimated the country, because civil war. I talk about that in Petrodollar Part 2 and 3, the vacuum of power that's left after America goes. When you take out Saddam, you take out Gaddafi, there's a huge chasm there, and that is often filled by guerrilla groups. Terror, obviously, ISIS would be one in both countries.
More extreme elements usually, fill the power vacuum.
Exactly, and that brings us round to the quote that you used from AA when he said, surely Blair and the intelligence services knew what they were doing, and and there's a famous New
The
York.
answer is, they definitely did. They're just willing to, pay for the consequence. But sorry, you had a quote.
Yeah, there's this guy. I think you might have heard of him. He's a New York real estate mogul. He said in 2015 that the world is a lot more dangerous. The world was a lot more safer when Assad in Syria, Gaddafi, and Saddam Hussein were in power, and he got a lot of flack from the American press, and that was, of course, the 45th president of the United States himself, Donald J. Trump, and he was right then, and he's right now. I mean, you look at it. I mean, wherever the American military goes, they just leave it's just chaos, carnage, bloodshed, and destruction. And I don't want to get too much.
And as the quote we talked about before the stream began, I mean, what was the America goes to war and Europe gets the refugees, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that definitely was one of the prevailing narratives in Europe for. I mean, we're almost coming up to a decade now, because they call it the 2015 refugee crisis, but that was just the height of it. It predates and postdates 2015, and it's all a product of the petrodollar wars and the destabilizing the region. And I mean, it's almost
that's I think the truly sort of terrifying part of this is sort of the secondary, tertiary ripple effects that these sort of very economic and clinical decisions in a way have on the wider world. Now we're
Well,
coming up
exactly, 'cause
on 1 hour and 15 here, so I'm just going to ask anyone who has any questions. I see there's a couple of super chats. Get them in now because we're probably going to leave soon. Sorry, I'll let you speak, Dissident, and then I would like to read a quote from your part 3 of the petrodollar
yeah.
to end.
No,
the
I
stream.
won't add too much. I'm just very excited for my first super chats, actually. So yeah, no, you can go ahead, Walrus.
All right. So in part 3, I think you have a passage or a paragraph that really demonstrates how careless or willingly ignorant U.S. has been with this, and how you said it's up to us in Europe to try to divorce ourselves from it because we're the ones paying. And so I'll bring up the quote here.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to read this passage, and then we'll discuss that and whatever super chats we have. My work differs from much of the existing body of work in the U.S. foreign policy, which proposes that there has been no real benefit for the U.S. from these invasions, and that Washington hasn't gained anything from these wars. You hear this rhetoric a lot in the media, but I beg to differ because the dollar's world reserve currency status endures, and the dollar system continues to this day. What is important to grasp here is that a major attack on U.S. soil poses a significant threat to the stability of the U.S. dollar and the long-term viability of the dollar system. As I alluded to in part 2, the petrodollar wars are part of a wider policy of containment undertaken to repel any attack against the dollar. The more the dollar declines in value, the less all the dollar holdings and assets are worth, and the more likely foreign nations are to dump the dollar, ultimately threatening its reserve currency status and the U.S. economy as a whole. But an attack against the United States overseas is much less of a threat in terms of how it impacts the dollar. The fact that another 9/11 has been avoided is a success for Washington, even set against the backdrop of all the attacks in other countries around the world. It does not matter about train bombings in Spain, or gunmen holding theater patrons hostage in Paris, France, or truck attacks in Christmas markets in Germany. What really matters is that the US is spared another attack on the homeland like 9/11, and so far it has been. America did not invade Afghanistan after the 1998 terrorist attack at the American embassies in Tanzania and Kenya by Al-Qaeda. Indeed, these attacks did not have the same casualty counts as 9/11, yes, but the point is that those attacks did not constitute a threat to the dollar system as 9/11 did. They also predate the introduction of the euro, so at the time of the 2 African embassy terrorist attacks, there was no rival currency to the dollar that posed a threat. I think, especially the middle here, that, as long as there's not another 9/11, the GAE is willing to pay with, kids being run over at Christmas markets in Germany. Really, I don't want to be too black-pilling, but it's a very grim analysis once you realize the implications of the system.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, as long as again, as long as it sort of serves their broader geopolitical goals, they will do what they have to. I mean, you kind of almost see a similar pathology with the Ukraine-Russia conflict. It doesn't matter how long this goes on for.
We'll fight to the last Ukrainian. As who was it that said that? It was one of the American senators, I think. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Which is a kind of a big reveal, sort of preference as to how they see that conflict. But again, it comes back to this idea that you do what's in your best interests, and morality doesn't really play a part. It's that Mearsheimer idea of real politique, and absolutely. I mean, thanks for reading that. I mean, it really doesn't matter what happens in Europe, because I mean, if I'm being honest, and I'm being honest because I've done the research. I mean, Islamic terrorism didn't really exist in Europe until America started these wars. I mean, there were little things, but they were a lot to do with France and Algeria. Their Algerian independence movement, which is not a pan-European thing. I didn't even hear about it at the time, but since then, I mean, I don't want to sound a bit stupid here, but there's a whole ocean that separates mainland America from the other continents.
I can speak anecdotally, from a admittedly small country with not that many refugees, but growing up, I mean, the foreigners were usually Vietnamese people who came a long time
Sure.
ago. South Americans fleeing Pinochet.
Yeah.
They were Balkans from the various
Yugoslavia.
civil wars over there in the 90s, right? And they were Iranians, highly educated, usually fleeing the Ayatollah, I think. And Islamic multicultural issues, to put it delicately, wasn't a thing until, after Iraq, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, I think
And to this day, I mean, the Vietnamese who are still here aren't causing any problems,
no, exactly. No, they don't. They don't. And I mean, a lot of that immigration. I mean, in a way, I mean, there is a precedent in the United States as well, with all the wars they've caused in Asia, in Vietnam, and things.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Laos and Cambodia, they've had to absorb a lot of people there, and also Central America. I mean, how many countries have they destabilized in Latin America? I mean, almost all of them, actually.
And it's not like Iraq was the first thing the U.S. ever did that destabilized the region, but there is certainly a before and after sort of effect on Europe and its multicultural problems. And I think a lot of it has to do with the destabilization that the U.S. did in the region.
Yeah, I mean, it's, again, from my own anecdotal experiences. I mean, okay, there's a higher sort of density of Muslims, whether they're, from Arab descent or Pakistan or Bengal or Bangladesh, But I mean, okay, they've always been others, I guess, but culturally and religiously. But it was nowhere near as bad until, the terror attacks. But I mean, they were a result of US, meddling and US foreign policy in that region. But it's changed the world. I say that in Petrodollar partly. There's no doubt about it. The whole landscape of, certainly Europe, but it goes beyond Europe. But certainly the continent has been sort of recast in the shadow of, the petrodollar wars, US foreign policy, and the necessity to maintain this system, at all costs. And really, and we pay, in many ways,
Unfortunately,
social,
yes, we do.
Yeah. So monetarily.
Bloody Path, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but
No.
we're coming up at almost 1.5 hours here. Do you have anything you would like to ask Dissident Nomad here, or
I mean, I think we covered so many of the questions, and I have some questions. I'm just afraid that we're going to end up going on like these mega tangents about Richard Nixon, for example, and Henry Kissinger. But I think we're going to have to save that for a second stream.
Yeah, I'm actually
very
reading
interested
a biography
in learning more.
Yeah, I'm actually reading a biography on Kissinger and Nixon. Actually, I was reading it before I came on, so that's quite funny. But yeah, let's I don't know. Yeah, let's do the super chats if you want. Walrus, up to you.
First one is from Paul Moosefoot. A while ago, he said, "Do you think the U.S. will ever issue a 100-year Treasury bond?" Now, that's not necessarily directed directly at you, Dissident Nomad, but feel free to answer if you if you have a thought.
I don't know if Western civilization's got another 100 years in it to. Well, I don't know if we've got another 20
Well,
years.
What matters is that the U.S. believes that it has another 100 years, and someone is stupid enough to buy it, I guess.
Right, exactly. Maybe it will be a central bank digital bond or a treasury or something. I'm not sure that we key into our ID cards on our smartphone apps and the chip in our head that they install. Or I'm not sure, but the yield on the treasury has gone down and down, and since the early 80s. But I think one thing on that is, compared to a bond from another country or another issued in another currency, it is still very low. But I'm not sure. Time will tell, I think. Yeah. 100-year treasury.
I think if they do, regardless, I mean, you're in pretty deep. That's almost like admitting that the US is in trouble if they do it, right? Okay, Glow in the Dark for $10 says, I think the problem is that neolibs understand now that if they can bully foreign countries, they can offset the financial burdens on them for their policies. Neocons just want global dominance.
Yeah,
Well,
absolutely.
that makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of this. I mean, the neocons are part of the, how do I say, the mental architecture of U.S. foreign policy, and the idea that the U.S. has got to employ force to sort of achieve its aims, its ambitions. I mean, a lot of the neocons, Paul Wolfowitz, is it Douglas Faith or something? They were, behind these engagements, and when other aspects of the conservative movement challenged them, for example, Patrick Buchanan and Sam Francis, obviously there was a big split in the conservative movement in America in the early 90s, and the neocons they're still there. John Bolton, he wanted to invade Iran and things. They're still there pressing for war on. I mean, there are some people that say in the 2008 election, if John McCain had won, he would have had America at war on, basically in like 4 continents or in all 4 corners of the globe. He just would have let loose. So it's probably a good thing that Obama got in, and even he launched drone strikes and expanded military engagements.
Kept it or kicked it while it was down.
Yeah, it's do you want the red poison or the blue poison? It doesn't matter who's in office, you get a version of this.
I guess the difference, as many a boomer comic has shown, is that the only difference is that there's the LGBT flag on the bombs, right?
Right, exactly. And on that note, I mean, I don't, I'm not too preoccupied with party politics because I think it's all nonsense whoever gets involved. But I just do not believe that people like, say Kamala Harris, the vice president. I mean, I just don't see how somebody like that and all these other Ocasio-Cortez, I don't see that they know the inner workings of this system. I don't even think they'd know what a petrodollar is, to be honest. It's the deep state. It's the neocons.
Yeah, it's the departments and the foreign offices, and this is just something, this is just everyday operations that are churning in the background of this.
The petrodollar, is that what you said?
Yeah, the
petrodollar.
The day
like
that
the
petrodollar. The day that
but
someone like Cortez is holding the levers to power and starting to suggest, that we
some
should
of them
pull
are
out of foreign wars, then she's going to get pulled aside and get told that we can't do that. It's going to ruin the economy. Don't right?
Yeah, I agree. I think the administrations of yesteryear are probably closer to that nexus of power, but now they just get all these clowns and stooges to go on about identity politics and all this victimhood narratives. Well, whilst in the background, it's the Boltons and the Pompeos and the Kushners and all these people that are really the architects of what we see in the world today. But again, that's a tangent, I think, for another time, maybe.
Did you have a comment, Ludwig?
You have the. I mean, you need to have these ideological figures, right? There's always, like we talked about with the Burnham stream, like there's always 2 parts to the politics. You think you have the wish fulfillment parts and the actual realpolitik that's underneath. And Ocasio-Cortez, she is just an ideological figure in a sense. Some of these politicians just pure ideology. The only reason they exist is to sort of prop up this kind of like. It's to create pathos for the normies, essentially, just to get like the normies who are marginally interested in politics to be on their side and to sort of be a part of it, because the normie just does not have any political agency in terms of even understanding something like the petrodollar system. I think like most Americans aren't not only apathetic. I don't think they have the faculties to even grasp it. I mean, I'm kind of on the borderline myself. I think if you knocked me maybe 10 IQ points, I don't think I could even comprehend it.
It does require a certain knowledge of both economics and then finance, and then having the faculties to understand these concepts, and then understanding the system and how that has implications further on, right? So we're talking quite a few levels of, as I said, for each nugget of information you get, if you can sort of connect it to the previous one, you're going to have another layer of, oh no, that's horrible, right?
Yeah, I mean, they've hollowed out the IQ in the West so much that the normies just believe whatever Netflix or HBO or tell them. To be honest, you see that in Europe as well. You see that in the UK everywhere. They just the NPCs just do as they're told and parrot those talking points, don't they? I mean, if you gave them the petrodollar or the bond treasury market, their heads will explode because they wouldn't be able to process it properly.
Next super chat here. Glow in the Dark for $5 says, if you must use the dollar in its financial systems, you're practically a slave. If not, you drink a poison chalice when the USA acts belligerent with money. Well, I mean, you're kind of right, but it's not as simply as just, I mean, there are military bases in my country that the US operates, and we can't just say no, right? There's got to be some maneuvering here. As nice as it sounds and as based as it is to call someone a slave because they trade in the dollar, it's the world we live in. You can't just deny it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's what I'd say. I mean, alongside that is that any country, any government that sort of stood up to America on the international stage has challenged the petrodollar hegemony. America tends to, seize them as the enemy. Venezuela, North Korea, the main one would be Iran, to be honest. There are a few other. A few of the countries that stood up to US posturing on the international stage. But I don't know. It's hard.
Iceland said no in 2005. I need, I guess, confirmation on that. But it's about the significance of Iceland saying no to the dollar isn't going to destabilize the entire system, right? An OPEC nation or another large oil nation like Norway or Venezuela saying no is going to impact it, right? So, or the UK for that matter, Dissident Nomad, although you guys are already, of course, have your own things, but you're still, as you said, you're trading more in dollars than you are pounds anyway.
I mean, in terms of like the UK, I mean, I think one thing that's interesting in terms of the UK's position against the euro, there's a lot of people that feel that one of the reasons why the UK didn't adopt the euro is because the US, because Washington didn't want all of that liquidity from the pound being passed onto the euro currency, and the inverted commas, the special relationship kind of took hold there. But that's a different thing. Sorry, Liquid Swan, I can't really speak too much to Iceland, but it would not.
He meant they said no to US bases. Well, that's a different thing. I mean, there's a bit more wiggle room in saying no to the base.
Definitely.
For us, it's already too late. Glow in the Dark for another $2 says, do you think petrol yuan will be worse? I suppose he's talking about China here.
I think that's quite interesting. I'll probably be covering that later with Radlib and Black Horse on another stream. The petro yuan, I mean, it is interesting. I mean, I don't know. I mean, the problem is, as I say in petrodollar part, I can't remember, 2 or 3, the US is trapped in this situation where the more they involve themselves in the Middle East, the more instability grows and the more hostile the responses to their presence there gets complicated. But if they leave, then what's going to fill the vacuum? In terms of the petro yuan, I don't think the free world wants to see the dollar replaced by the yuan, because China already has the biggest manufacturing sector. They have the largest amount of foreign currency reserves. They've got, I think, they're up to 18 trillion or 20 trillion. And to them,
they already have a couple of agreements with countries in Africa and I think Venezuela or some other South African country. They have some trade agreements that are effectively like mini petrol yuan systems.
Yeah, basically Venezuela they do. Yeah, they basically is a de facto kind of petro yuan, but it's just obviously it's not quite the same as a dollar. But I mean, the thing is, America can't really tell China what to do as they would, I guess Iraq or Libya or Afghanistan. They can't just sort of march in there because for a number of, basically obvious reasons, to be honest. So there is more and more trade away from the dollar in other currencies. There is slowly becoming a realization that, as less and less trade is US oriented and doesn't involve countries within America's gambit, there is going to be a geopolitical shift, and there should be a shift in monetary relations as well. So what that bodes for the future, I don't know, but you can.
It's interesting coming off of sort of like a year of Ukraine now as well. There's a lot of discussion around diminishing sort of weapon stockpiles and ammunition stockpiles for the US, as they've spent a lot of resources in the Ukraine war indirectly, and the dollar sort of losing its value and losing and more people potentially moving off of the dollar will decrease both the speed and the resources required to rebuild that stock fast enough. So you might end up in a situation where the US, in terms of military power, is significantly weaker than it looks. Not to be too optimistic for anything here.
Absolutely.
A diminishing empire, but it's an interesting thought to keep in mind that what's the Ernest Hemingway quote? You go broke in two, or you go bankrupt in two ways: first slowly and then very quickly. So it compounds, is my point.
It definitely is. I mean, the paradigm is always in a state of flux, really. I mean, the amazing thing that I would say is that, one thing, going right back to my roots and studying history, war, pandemics, terrorism, any amount of global economic downturns, recessions, the 2008 crisis, somehow this system, the dollar system, has endured through all of this. It's still here. It's basically, it's pretty much the same when you talk about the petrodollar and the bond and treasury market and things. Now, okay, you could say there's hints that it's moving away, but whether it's the advent of the euro, the rise of China, somehow this system is still here and still kind of trundles along. But for how much longer for, is the question, really. The $64,000 question. No pun intended.
Exactly. Glow in the dark for another $5 says Saudi Arabia made a deal with China with the petro yuan. Yeah, I included a clip actually from Tucker Carlson, I think, talking about that in the teaser. That's why I ask, if that happens, the USA will, in my opinion, be more belligerent. Well, they might be, right? If they feel that they have the resources and the sort of political capital too, right? Because as you said, it's Europe is getting kind of tired of the US's adventures in the Middle East and the consequences it has for us. And with Ukraine now as well being a quote unquote front, they might feel a bit hesitant in taking on another operation like this, or we might just see, some clandestine operations instead.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, again, it's like I don't know how America would fight another hot war, to be honest. I mean, okay, you could say some time has elapsed since the Iraq war, but that's the danger if Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia, if he wakes up on the wrong side of freedom and liberty, USA bed, he might say, well, he could do a couple of things. He could say, we're going to start trading oil in a basket of currencies, yen, yuan, rupee, euro, whatever.
I mean, the
Or
thing
he
is,
could
though,
decide
thing
to
is, though,
discard the
if
dollar.
they start a hot war, I mean, as a last resort thing, I mean,
Yeah.
it's the will in the people to fight another sort of to send the. It's been 20 years since Iraq, right? So you have basically a generation of young men who would have grown up watching, uh, fellow soldiers, quote unquote, die in
Yeah.
the desert, right? And if they're conservative, which most military men tend to be, right?
Yeah.
Are the U.S. going to be able to sell another generation on dying overseas for big oil, right?
Yeah, maybe that's the reason they're investing in all these, the drones, the unmanned drones,
Exactly.
and the
They're
robotics as
losing
well.
their warrior class, right?
They are, they are. They have totally hollowed out their warrior class and that instinct, and also the patriotism. I mean, say what you want about it. I mean, it kind of is a version of patriotism, whether it's nationalism or whatever, is kind of essential to having a functioning military and whatnot. But yeah, it's very the geopolitical dimensions to this are sort of very interesting. I mean, I just I don't know how they're going to do it. I mean, the backlash would be on another level, and of course, like as well, like technology has changed now. I mean, the flow of information, of news,
Yeah.
it's not the same. I mean, everybody walks around with a computer in their pocket effectively, and a camera as well. So I just don't see I don't see how this one resolves
The
itself.
fact remains, though, that if Saudi Arabia has made sort of the decision to go along with this, they're in a position where they don't feel directly threatened by the U.S., right?
Right,
So
exactly, yeah.
that's telling us something, at least, that Saudi Arabia feel like, well, the U.S. they're basically calling the bluff of the Americans, right? Are you going to do it? and obviously they think they're not, and I don't think they're going to do it either for a lot of the reasons you said, Dissident Nomad, and what we've talked
Yeah.
about. So, but it's interesting to see, because there has to be some kind of response, right? Eventually.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, in terms of, I mean, just swinging back to China. I mean, China also has really become, been very successful, developed, strengthened immeasurably because of their relationship with the United States. I mean, China's growth is predicated on, their many trade deals with Washington and whatnot. I mean, I think Trump even said on the campaign trail is something like, just on the interest rate alone, China has built all this, vastly superior infrastructure, highways and dams, bridges. They've got the longest railway. They've got the tallest railway as well. All the longest bridges. I think most of them are in China. So they've also profited immensely from this. I don't believe there'll ever be a China America hot war. That will never happen, in my opinion. That's just fantasy. I don't see them going to war for Taiwan either, because it's just not. It just isn't really worth it.
It's not worth the massive response that's going to be it's going to be met with from the US,
because they will then have to suffer, were that to happen, the real inflationary effects of China reducing exposure to the US bond and treasury market, But then the problem is that has consequences for China, because the US is their single biggest market in terms of an actual outright sovereign nation. China needs America to keep on buying their products, their manufactured products. Yep. That's why they hold all the US debt. They buy up the US debt because the US takes that money and then they then reinvest it back into the Chinese market, buying up all the rubbish for Target and Walmart. And it's this crazy, Walrus, this crazy house of cards system. And you look at it, and 100 times, and like, how does this not collapse in on itself? I mean, like, China pays America money to get into debt, so they buy more goods from China, and then, you know, it repeats. You know, it's
a hell of a system.
It is, yeah.
It's a wonder that it's still running.
Exactly. I mean, it brings into question deeper, sort of more almost profound questions about, you know, the value of fiat money and what are paper currencies, what are they actually worth? I mean, they're not backed by anything. So trust and faith, that's what they trust and faith in the government.
We're running on spit and prayers, isn't that what they're saying?
What trust do people have in governments, whether it's the UK, the US, whether it's the Federal Reserve, the ECB, the Bank of England? I mean, have they not messed up? Have they not screwed things up enough? I mean, they've basically messed up everything they can, from the monetary system to the economy to the society, the housing market, the industry. I mean, what's left? I mean,
left? Yeah, it's almost big tech. Nothing. That's the next one.
I don't know.
Glow in the Dark for another $5 says they don't want a war. They want to cause civil wars in other countries like Ukraine, and when the fighting is over, they get a new debt slave. Well, I mean, I don't want to monkey paw anything here, but it's, you know, entirely logical that, you know, the Middle East, due to Saudi Arabia, could, you know, become like a weird proxy war between China and the US by, you know, doing some weird civil war stuff. But that seems kind of unlikely, given how tied the US already is to Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't even see like proxy engagements. They have a lot of proxy engagements with Iran across the Middle East area in numerous theaters there, but I just don't I don't see how that would happen in terms of.
I feel like Saudi is too big of a fish for the US to let go in that way. I think this is almost just kind of like a message being sent to the US.
Yeah, I mean,
we can go without you. Just, you know.
Of course, now there is another factor to this, and that's that an author called William R. Clark, he has a book called Petrodollar Warfare. He talks about this when the international community, of course, it does have one trump card, and that is, of course, that they could just choose to dump the dollar if the US keeps on invading countries, destabilizing other nations and regions. Now, obviously, I don't know how that would play out. I mean, that's quite a bold assertion to make, but I think the margins are so fine, and it's very difficult to look at. I mean, I think the dollar system, or some version of it, will just stay, to be honest, because there isn't an immediate replacement to the US dollar and the broader dollar system we have, unless of course China takes the initiative, unless they become more aggressive, more proactive. But you know, it's just another kind of geopolitical can of worms. It's just speculating, really. But
finally, a question from the moderator of the chat here, Nordanon. He asks, Coke or Pepsi?
Two sides of the same coin, I think, aren't they? Yeah, choose your poison. It's just too much sugar for me, really. It's but again, all these corporations. I mean, the current monetary system we have. Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, he said when he was a French finance minister, going to become French president, he said, you know, basically the current setup we have undercuts the spending of the US government, US corporations, and US people as well. So, and all these corporations, they benefit from cheap credit, with low interest rates attached, which European, Japanese, whatever, Korean, companies can't compete with because they don't trade in the dollar, So, corporate America is also a big beneficiary of this, as is Wall Street and the military industrial complex as well. Until there's another arrangement, Liquid Swan, until there's another arrangement, another contender, I don't see. I'm too busy exploring the gay at the moment to really think. But I agree with what Glow in the Dark says about all these proxy conflicts and civil unrest and things. It, in a way, if it's against one of America's geopolitical rivals like Russia, Iran, even China to some degree, if you want to look at it like that, I mean, it does indirectly sort of benefits America. They don't, have to put boots on the ground or whatever. And I think AA said once, nationalism in the countries that border the old Soviet Union borders or Russia's borders are a net positive for the gay, because it's sort of they can sort of weaponize that against America's
keeps
rivals.
a perimeter, right?
Exactly, yeah. It's a new Iron Curtain, really, if they can drum up nationalism in Poland and Ukraine. But obviously, that's now totally backfired. Well, I mean, that's it's backfired for us anyway, as things stand. But
certainly,
yeah, that's another debate for another day, maybe.
Definitely. All right. Before we go, you started appearing more and more lately. Where can people find you and your writings?
Yeah, I've got my Substack, which I hope we can drop into the comment section or the description. Yeah, I'm really just, at the moment, I'm more of a writer, to be honest. I'm going to go on more streams and talk about these ideas as they get a bit more exposure and things, and I think people warm to my content. I've really got to thank Praxarchy, because both Luddick, before him Cameron, really, they gave me an outlet and they gave me a focus and a direction. Before I met them, 5-6 months ago, I was, I literally had 100,000 words on my hard drive that were just all over the place. And I'm going to carry on writing for Praxarchy and also on the Substack. And I don't think I will branch out into YouTube. I think writing is my sort of forte. So,
you have a Twitter as well, don't you?
Yes, I do. Yeah, sorry, I am on Twitter. Yeah, God, that's right. I mean, yeah, I'm on Twitter, but I got the handle mixed up, so it's a bit of a mouthful. It's Stevie G Forever. So
I'll drop that in the description as well, if you can just send it to both that and your Substack later. And then, of course, a lot of your writings are on praxarchy.com. You appeared last week, I think, on Radical Liberation's channel.
And I'm going there in about an hour, actually.
Okay, very good. So
and,
you can all head over to Radical Liberation's channel and hear more Dissident Nomad. I think the stream you did with Radlib was on a lot of the same things we talked about today, but a bit more in depth on the economics.
It was a bit
obviously
more focused on history and things, but it's kind of hard with political economy, because all the ideas are they're all wrapped up in themselves, and you kind of you sort of regurgitate.
I think
the same stuff.
if you enjoyed this stream and you will want to learn sort of more on about the journey you've been on here in writing all of this, I think going to Radical Liberation and watching that video called Empire of Dollars is a very, very good next step.
This has been great, though. We've covered a lot of ground. We've covered the current situation, the history, the geopolitics, the wars, a bit on the finance. So it's been a really worthwhile, productive stream. I think we didn't get lost in the swamp of political economy.
It's very easy. I had to hold myself back because there's just so much you can talk about here.
But I could tell you've read my articles, which does make a difference. It does, to be honest. So thanks a lot for doing that, because I think that's anchored the stream a bit like the a gold-backed dollar, which we no longer.
Very good. All right. For me, I mean, obviously there's this YouTube channel. If you made it this far, please subscribe. Remember to like, comment. It helps boost everything in the algorithm. There's a link to a Substack that I started, which has only one article on it so far. If you want to subscribe to that, my Twitter handle should be in the description as well, where I shitpost pretty much daily, I guess. Luddic Path, your socials.
Yeah, follow me on Twitter. That's all you need. Praxarchy has already been recommended. I think the whole stream has been sort of an advertisement for the Praxarchy. So
it's great stuff.
That's really great. It's been great to have Dissident Nomad on. High quality stream. I hope we can have you back another time.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I just wanted to say about your Burnham stream. It's probably the best one I've heard on Burnham. I read 2 Burnham books last year, and that your stream kind of binded it all together very well. So
that's good. We're going to do a part 2 on that book as well. Because we only covered half of it, and we were supposed to, but was that 2 weeks ago? But something came up, so we had to cancel that stream.
Yeah, that's great. So, yeah, I'll be spending a lot more time on the Longhouse for sure. So there's a lot of content about these days. It's hard to know where to click and watch, but that's all good. That's all healthy. It means we're moving in the right direction, I think, and more people come to these ideas, and it's a threat to the system. And,
it's a great problem to have, I think, to the point like the sphere is getting so big that I can't keep track of who's actually in here. I just see like stuff popping up all over the place in terms of content, and people are coming in, like high quality people as well. Like that's the important part. Like it's not a lot of the the shit posters are being sort of filtered out, and so that the high quality stuff
give credit to people like the quote unquote thought leaders of the sphere, though. Someone like Academic Agent for diligently sort of taking on the fight with the Nick Fuentes crowd and doing all of that gatekeeping. That is it's underrated how much that helps in keeping the quality of the quote unquote community high.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it is indeed. Yeah, I mean,
all right, it's almost 2 hours. I think it's time that we head off and give Dissident Nomad some time to get ready for his next appearance over at Radlib's channel. Thank you all for watching.
Thanks to everyone in the chat. That's been really enjoyable. Appreciate it, Walrus. Love it.
And we'll see you all next week. Have a good evening.
Good evening.